When Jack was 10, his father relocated the family to New York. A formidable business opportunist and an investor in the stock market, Joe Sr. had grown his wealth by applying his skills to various business ventures, including the film industry.
He was spending most of his time now in New York. He was a film producer, he was a film executive, and the business side of the movie business was in New York. The Bronxville house, where Jack really grows up, was a mansion with a huge lawn, big driveway, lots of land for the kids to play.
The family began spending their summer and early autumn months at the beachside village of Hyannisport, part of the Cape Cod area in Massachusetts. After renting a summer residence at 50 Marchant Avenue for several years, Joe Sr. purchased the home.
The family spends more time together in Hyannisport than anywhere else. What binds them together is not their home in Bronxville, but Hyannisport.
Jack was surrounded by 8 siblings: Joe Jr., Rosemary, Kathleen, Eunice, Patricia, Robert, Jean, and Ted. Though they were raised in considerable wealth, Joe and Rose taught their children about the value of money, the importance of a strong work ethic, and the need to stay informed about world affairs, which often led to heated political discussions at the dinner table.
Joe and Rose led conversations about current events and global events for all 9 of the siblings over dinner. And Joe was like a quizmaster. The parents seated the children, particularly the boys, with this sense of history, current events, global events. And from that, the boys did pursue it on their own.
I think you can't understand the Kennedys without understanding Hyannisport. It's this big, old, rambling house. There's 9 children spilling out of the rooms. They're all sailing. They're all in competition with each other. There's a tennis court. If they're not playing tennis, they're playing touch football. If they're not doing that, they've got a pickup baseball game going. And they never lacked for companionship because they had each other. They're each other's best friends.
Kennedy felt at one with the sea. He was able to get clear mind, they call it blue mind, where everything comes clear to you when you're in a maritime environment. And that's why so often he would be at Cape Cod when he would make his big decisions in his life.
In the decades to come, the family compound would serve as a source of stability and calm in Jack's ever-changing world. In 1939, with his father now living and working in London as ambassador to Great Britain, Jack decided to travel overseas. He set off on a 7-month tour of Europe, the Middle East, and the Soviet Union, meeting with leaders, diplomats, and everyday people to gather information about the growing threat of war. Jack's journey began in London, where he took tea with Princess Elizabeth. Then he was off to Eastern Europe, stopping in Warsaw, Poland. As he traveled, he often corresponded with Lem Billings and reported his observations back to his father.
Why, Rosie? That's enough.
On another leg of the trip, Jack was joined by his Harvard roommate, Torby MacDonald. They crossed into Nazi Germany and were heckled by local stormtroopers who believed they were disrespecting the statue of a Nazi hero. Days later, traveling at high speeds near Paris, en route to see his father, Jack lost control of his vehicle, flipping it. In his true lighthearted fashion, Jack laughed off his near-death experience. While upside down in the car, he is said to have quipped to Torby, "Well, pal, we didn't make it, did we?" On August 19th, Jack arrived in the German capital of Berlin. At that moment, Hitler's troops were preparing to attack Poland, making their way to the border. Less than 2 weeks later, Hitler's forces invaded. The Second World War had begun. During his time visiting the House of Commons, Jack was deeply inspired by Winston Churchill and was awestruck listening to his first wartime speech, rallying the free world to stand up to the oncoming battle against Hitler. After listening to Churchill's remarks, Jack was motivated to do his part as well. Upon the outbreak of the war, German U-boats began sinking ships. The first ship lost was the Scottish passenger liner SS Athenia. Joe Sr. sent his son to meet with and assist hundreds of American survivors hospitalized in Glasgow. During this trip, Jack spoke publicly, reassuring those affected that they would be safely transported back to the U.S. He was also tasked with gathering first-hand information about the attack. Finally, safe passage home was secured for the American survivors. Jack's work was done. After 7 months in Europe, Jack Kennedy was now 22 years old. He had seen Nazi Germany up close, listened to his political hero Winston Churchill speak in the House of Commons, shared tea with the future Queen of the United Kingdom, crashed his car in France, and helped fellow Americans in the wake of a wartime attack.
He was exposed from a very early age to a really incredible array of international experiences, quite untypical for people in his generation in this country.
Jack had experienced firsthand what it meant to be involved in high-level political, cultural, and military situations, and began to break away from his father's stifling political beliefs. His whirlwind tour of Europe laid the foundations of a new worldview that would evolve for years to come.
I think it was just the self-confidence that Jack got from traveling abroad, from being on his own, from being encouraged through all of those early meals led by Joe and Rose to think for himself, that he eventually did think for himself, and from his travels came to different conclusions than Joe came to, that America needed to play a prominent role on the world stage if freedom were to prevail.